This video is a recording of a panel from Story Crafting Sessions Science Fiction, a free virtual conference hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group in partnership with Renaissance Press. To learn more about the Weeknight Writers Group, go to businessforauthors.com/weeknight-writers. And to learn more about Renaissance Press, you can go to pressesrenaissancepress.ca.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's panel on accessibility in science fiction, a discussion of imagining new tools for disabled people in our stories. I am Stephen Graham King. I am a writer of Quick Trip, space opera, far future science fiction, my Maverick Art cycle. My next book is coming out on April 15th in that series. I'm also a photographer, and this is a topic that is very close to my heart. So I am very lucky and privileged to get to lead this conversation with some wonderful people and talk about this a little bit more. I will let you know that only the panelists and myself will be able to join with audio and video. The panel is being recorded, and there will be a closed captioning. Thanks to our lovely sponsor, Renaissance Press. They are a Canadian publisher dedicated to publishing, uplifting, and supporting marginalized authors here in Canada. And that closed captioning is due to their generosity in sponsoring the panel today. So thank you to them, and thank you to all of you for joining us. I forgot to mention my pronouns are he, him, or they, them. And what I would like to do now is have our panelists introduce themselves. Please tell us about yourself, your pronouns as well, and why you wanted to be a part of the discussion. Jump in, anybody.
Go
ahead.
I guess I will go first. I am Diana Gunn. I kind of organized this whole thing. I am a fantasy writer first, but have recently been dabbling in science fiction, and accessibility in all kinds of fiction has become a personal fascination of mine. I also run the Spoonie Authors podcast, which is a podcast where I interview disabled authors. And we have some really fun ones, including interviews with a couple of the panelists here. And why I wanted to be on the panel is, because it's become a personal fascination.
Okay, I'll go next. Moss Whelan. I'm the author of Greyhawk of Terrapin and some lovely fantasy. My interest in doing this panel is an invisible disability, mental health. I have PTSD. And so I have things to say about this. I love science fiction, I have for a while, and it's just so great to be putting my mind there and going, what can you do with science fiction as far as accessibility goes?
I'll go ahead and go next. My name is Rebecca Gibson. I have a PhD in biological anthropology, which is one place that my fascination with accessibility in science fiction begins, because we're all biological beings, but we can add to that if we want. And my first book was Desire in the Age of Robots and AI, an investigation in science fiction and fact. So I look at science fiction and specifically human-robot sexual interactions to talk about what we can do with the body and how our physical limitations are not necessarily necessary within the worlds of science fiction. I wanted to be on this panel because it is also personal for me too. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a collagen condition, and I consider myself a good part of the way to being a cyborg.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex J. Lohr. My pronouns are he or they. I write queer sci-fi and fantasy, usually with an emphasis on making my sci-fi and fantasy as like queer and trans and disability inclusive as possible. That's honestly also been kind of like part of my journey as an author, I'm a high school teacher, I'm a queer and trans advocate. I feel like there are always so many things to learn. And that's kind of part of why I really love being on panels like this, because there are always so many different perspectives. As to me personally, I very much grew up with a lot of like invisible or maybe not so invisible disabilities. People were just like, yeah, like congrats, you're weird, deal with it. Or, oh, we're not going to even like go into the way of like diagnosing things. Like I have a left side paralysis that leaves me like literally unable to balance. And people usually don't notice this until I do something like stand on a step or sometimes try to walk and things go sideways. Yeah, so like invisible disabilities like this, chronic illnesses. I have a blood clotting disease that we have no idea why my body randomly tries to kill me. I am fairly visually impaired. And obviously, like also I'm neurodivergent. I have some mental illnesses like depression and anxiety, ADHD. Like it's a nice like mix of things, diagnosed and not. And so that's always kind of been like an kind of point of interest of mine of like, oh wait, not everyone is like this, or oh, there are ways to make things more accessible. So I think like this panel is a really cool start to discuss these things as they apply to sci-fi.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. My first question, I'm curious as to what you think and why you think science fiction is such fertile ground for telling stories about disability, and why accessibility and disability needs to be addressed more in the genre. If somebody would like to give us a start, I'll just pick one. If you don't, jump in.
You sound like me as a teacher. I'll give it a start. So I think outside of any other genre, science fiction is really a great place for this, because there's very little prescription on what has to happen in science fiction. You've got the science aspect, you've got the fiction aspect, everything else is up to the reader, or the writer rather. You can have a happily ever after, but you don't have to. You can have aliens or monsters, but you don't have to. And it gives you a lot more flexibility to play around with whatever else is going on. I look specifically at the Blade Runner franchise and the Matrix franchise, and both of these sort of evoke ideas of humanity, but pushing that humanity past where we were before. And the ways that it pushes past it is this idea of what can the body do? What is necessarily physical, the physicality of the body in some sort of scientific, futuristic, ideal setting.
Excellent, thank you.
I'm gonna go next. I think also one of the things that sci-fi really gives us, right, is this idea of, okay, so how can we bridge some of these issues that we're encountering like in everyday life? Like it's like anything from, you know, like how do things like claustrophobia affect us if we're in space, or how do wheelchairs work on, like, if gravity is different? How do we navigate different things? If there's some sort of apocalyptic extinction event, who gets to go on a generation ship versus who doesn't? I think it like really lets us really puzzle with some of these social questions that are very much there and are very much on the forefront of many disabled folks thinking, but it really lets us kind of navigate these in a more nuanced way and really get non-disabled folk or neurotypical folk really think about like, oh yeah, wait a minute, why aren't we doing this? Or where could this possibly leave us in the future? I mean, we often talk about how much of the science of Star Trek, right, we have today. We have e-readers, we have communicators, like these types of things are now very much effect of life. So looking at disability and inclusivity in general, like the question I think in sci-fi is often, how can we take that to the next step and make that just be a facet of life where inclusivity isn't something special, but it's just something that's given.
Thank you.
I really agree with what Alex said. And for me, it's a combination of the possibilities that exist within science fiction, but also the possibilities for inspiration of things that are happening like right now. Like we are learning so much about the human body all the time, and like we might gripe about, you know, the way that funds are distributed unevenly across various, you know, health issues, but we are learning fascinating things about the human body all of the time and about medicine all of the time. And about, you know, these are things that can be used and extrapolated on to build future technology that could completely change the game for people with various illnesses. And that's a really interesting thing, like to start with something that is actually happening right now.
Excellent. Moss, do you have any thoughts for us?
I'll round it off with a response to the sort of an ideal or perfection, a utopia that is dangerous, and responding to that with a contrast, with sort of say, yes, you have this ideal in mind, but let's explore this. Let's show, you know, these are the results if you go in that direction. And if you don't take us, if you don't take everyone with you, you know, then this will be the outcome. So it's the benefit, the possibility of presenting a counter narrative as opposed to just going along with the ride and not saying anything. You know, here's science fiction offering a contrast.
Excellent. If I may, I was just going to add the thought of that. For me, I think science fiction shows us what we can be, and that can be either our horrible mistakes or the things that we can change and get. So that's for me where I'm here. So from there, I want to flip that idea on its head and ask what you think are the pitfalls of attempting to address matters of accessibility or disability in science fiction. Where do you think writers can and maybe have gone wrong when they approach this type of issue in their writing?
Accidental eugenics. Because a lot of people, when they think about eugenics, they think specifically about like sterilizing, like, you know, existing grown disabled people, but they don't necessarily think about like, oh, if you like have a screening and you decide you do not want a kid to live because of a disability, you know, that's not something that I feel like is really included in most people's understanding of eugenics. So a lot of writers, you know, they'll have some group that has eliminated bad genes and not really like inspect that thought very much. It's just a background fact about some group, and it always makes me very uncomfortable. Sometimes it is like the emphasis of the group and they're bad because they do this, but like a lot of the time it's just something that is done and normalized even in like the prevalent culture of a science fiction series and not questioned.
Like in Gattaca, which was a fabulous movie, but at the same time, the change that occurred in that movie was on such an individual level that it didn't, like, it made a difference for the main character, but it didn't make a difference for the overall society, which was still deliberately eugenicist. But other things that can go wrong are things like, we have a tendency to want canon in science fiction. We want things to hang on to that are, you know, solidly in the canon of whatever series we're thinking of, and that can be really limiting. We tend not to think beyond it or think expanding of it. One of the series now that is breaking out of that particular mold is the various Star Trek incarnations, but it's still getting a lot of pushback by people who are so very attached to the way things have always been done.
Yeah, I think that's also like kind of piggybacking on what you just said and what Diana said about who gets to decide what's our model, right? Often I think in sci-fi we're looking at like, oh, where's society going to be in the future? And very often we're either taking a utopian or a dystopian lens to that, but that also often means certain things are just like categorically excluded. Like I remember, I don't know you all, but when about 10 years ago, when there was like a lot of young adult fiction, dystopian fiction that very much was oriented about like, oh, some government is going to choose your ideal mate. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, where are our queer people at? Where are our fat people at? Where are our disabled people at? Like, what's happening here? Like, again, these like ideas of, oh, what went wrong here? What extinction event, what eugenics have happened? But it's also like really, really, I think, pointing to like a bigger issue with writers just not considering things that are past their individual personal experience or past what they feel is in any way, shape or form desirable. So I feel like that's kind of like the big pitfall of sci-fi is that whole idea of in a space that's perpetually expanding, we tend to still build up walls and build up borders of what can and can't work based on like what we know. And so I feel like that's probably the biggest pitfall that writers are doing, and to really like tear that down and really go like, okay, wait, but have you considered this? What are some parameters that really affect your thinking here that needs to be thought through?
I remember relationship or friendship a while ago, and being critiqued back because my mind was constantly going out. And the friend was saying, no, come back to Earth. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done here. And I was just, way out there and having a great time. And that could be a critique, a bit of a flip around, for somebody who's going off and out and doing these wonderful things and losing perspective. They're not, their moorings are gone and they're having a great time. And ultimately a critique is like, so what? What's, is this of value?
Thank you, everyone. The only thing I would maybe throw in there is the assumption that the goal of technology and progress is cure. The assumption that we are making these advances in science and technology to fix people rather than necessarily make the world work for more different types of people. Excellent. So how do you approach this type of thing in your own work? Whether that is your nonfiction, Rebecca, or whether it is your fiction, do you sort of attempt to intentionally tackle an issue of a specific disability? Does it just evolve out of your development of character? Does it come from your own lives? What is your starting point when you're trying to write something like this? Yes, boss.
I'm ready. Utopia, that really got me, because we get a lot of dystopia, but I wanted to go there. I'm in that mind frame of, okay, well, what would it look like? What would an actual utopia look like? As far as, say, as much as I can bring perspective to it, and say in answer to others. And so that's where I'm at in writing, is this sort of world building, but also the response back of, no, we want the good old days. We don't want this utopia. Sort of the pushback that was mentioned earlier. And it's wonderful, but then stepping outside into the quote unquote real world, and it's just there in my face everywhere I look. in the advertising or in, say, the limitations, the complaints of people on the street, they're informing me of, oh, it's like, oh, okay, so there we go. All right.
That's actually a fantastic segue into my own work, which, as you mentioned, is nonfiction. And I started all of my work through doing my dissertation as a graduate student. And the department I was in was highly social justice focused. And we all had to come up with a social justice angle. And I'm like, and eventually I got to the point where I'm like, the reason that I couldn't focus on one social justice angle is because we should be keeping all of them in mind. So my work is highly gender focused, it's highly race focused, it's highly disability focused, it's very intersectional, and I try to address as many different modalities of it as possible because I want better sci-fi. I want better sci-fi. I want better technology. I want better adaptive and assistive devices. And I want to be part of making that happen. And I actually am going to address something that's in the comments at the moment. The fourth Matrix movie does a much better job at talking about why the utopian version failed and adjusting the characters and the characterizations to it not being utopian. Specifically, when Neo in the fourth movie has been unplugged again from the Matrix and is just a guy. He's just a 40-year-old guy. He's no longer the one. He's just a guy. He can't fly. He can do some stuff, you know, has some superpowers, but they're not where they were before. And you really feel that weight of the ordinary, and it's just beautifully done. And I want that in my work.
I think for me, it really is like such an intrinsic part of character and world creation too. Like I feel like this is a key part of when I teach students about character creation too. I always push them to kind of look at, hey, what are some stories that we are not seeing? Because I feel like science fiction, again, as a medium, as a genre, has that ever expanding focus. And so obviously there are so many perspectives we don't see and so many questions that come up with it. That's kind of like how I personally approach this, where I'm like, oh yeah, wait, like if I'm throwing in a character who's visually impaired in this like really dystopian setting, like, yeah, I want to address some of these things about like, does this character like quote unquote want to get fixed? Like, no, what are some assistive devices that could work here? What are some things that couldn't work here? And then I think ultimately, I feel like all of us probably pull from our own experience more often than not. I'm definitely noticing myself like writing certain types of characters, and I'm realizing, oh yeah, it's because like this is another facet of identity that I really want to give more voice to, and obviously like give my personal spin to, because obviously identity and disability is not a monolith, but we're still seeing so very little about it. And so sometimes it is really like that conscious choice of giving that a platform and kind of starting that conversation too. I think sometimes that can definitely put you into a vulnerable position where it can feel like, wait, but because this isn't a monolith, what if I'm just injecting my own perspective, my own experience here, and maybe then inadvertently I'm steamrolling or going over someone else's perspective. But I think that's also kind of like, again, what comes with the territory of writing, to always be in a learning perspective. Like I feel like whenever I'm having any sort of discourse with anyone on disability, I'm always like, oh, wow, yeah, this is a facet I haven't thought about yet. That's really cool. Like, let me like think about that and incorporate that in my own thinking and writing and doing ultimately.
Diana, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I've approached this a few different ways depending on which story I've worked in. But the one that I think I'll talk about is the space horror story that I wrote last year that hasn't found a home yet. And something that I was thinking about while I was working on it is how something that is an accommodation for one person can sometimes be really unpleasant for another person, and how to balance that. Um, the small way that this showed up was, one person on this ship, her console, she had a chair because that was what she needed. And the other person didn't have a chair because they were the type of person who was always kind of bouncing around anyway. Um, and I think that's something that I really have thought about a lot because of the podcast that I do and the interviews that I've had over time, and the very many different things that people have talked about as uh, ways that they build accessibility into their world, and also their own access needs, and how sometimes these things do very much conflict. I mean, even in my own house, I have the type of ADHD where sometimes subtitles are unbearably distracting, and my partner has the type of ADHD where if they don't have subtitles, they miss half the stuff, you know. And so I think it's interesting of looking for ways to balance everyone's needs as much as is possible. And with science fiction, there's a lot of opportunity to create technology to accommodate those things.
Excellent. So imagine someone comes to you wanting to incorporate accessibility or disability into their work. It's one thing for us when we are in that world, and that is something that we relate to directly. But say someone is perhaps they don't experience that on a day-to-day basis. What would your advice be to someone who comes and says, I want to incorporate these things into my work more? How do I start? What do I need to do? What would your advice to them be?
Read the work of other disabled writers. I mean, like that I feel like that's such a like basic recommendation, but I get that question really frequently, whether it comes to like queer rep or trans rep or disabled rep. I'm like, okay, here's some ideas of how other people have done it. Specifically read other disabled writers and talk to disabled folks. Like really, like, again, I know we have like that love-hate relationship with Twitter and social media, but really, speaking of accessibility, it makes a lot of these like perspectives accessible. So my question always is like, ooh, so how many disabled writers do you read? How many disabled friends do you have? Who do you follow? Who is talking about these things that might not be affecting you at all, but might be something that you might want to think about?
Go, Moss. We're ready for you.
All right. Something I started doing maybe a year ago while editing is flipping around point of view, doing a draft where it could be, say, within his chapter, say, and then have the point of view in this sense from the disabled character, in question, and getting into that headspace, and instead of say being on the outside of beyond research, beyond talking with others, and actually in the editing process. This for me has been just like a light going on as far as examining gender, sexuality, race, culture, disability, and confronting a lot of assumptions that I have, and even say creating questions out of this editing technique of flipping the point of view. And out of that, sometimes it becomes dominant. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is the protagonist of the story. I assumed it was over here, but this is the spine, or say it becomes that.
I would tell them to make sure that their story has internal consistency. you can do a lot with science fiction. You can do things that are decidedly not possible right now. And it's not magic, it's just advanced science, but it has to have internal consistency. So for example, with the assistive devices that I'm using right now, I've got glasses, I've got braces on my hands. So you need an optician and a silversmith at the very least in your world somewhere. You have to be able to produce these assistive devices. One person I've seen it do it really, really well, or at least address this issue really, really well, is Anne Leckie in her Imperial Raj trilogy, where the medical correctives that they use can do almost anything, like can repair oxygen damaged lungs, can cure hypothermia, you can regrow limbs, all of the sorts of things. And it becomes a supply chain issue in the books. And it was just like, this is great. She addressed it. It's right there. So your world needs to have internal consistency, or your reader is going to be pulled out of the narrative while they try to figure out how you're doing those things that you're doing.
Diana?
My somewhat silly answer is to listen to my podcast that I am going to post the link for. But that's not really a silly answer, because the thing is you need to listen to a lot of different disabled person, because as I mentioned in my previous answer, every disabled person has different needs. Every neurodivergent person has different needs. Even if you have the same exact illness, you may have different needs because that illness reacts to your unique body in a different way. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't really fully grasp, because when we do see portrayals of an illness, typically it's a very limited number of portrayals and they are often very similar.
Right. Excellent. The one thing I'm going to add, and I'm adding a link over in the chat, is sensitivity editors. So if it is not a lived experience of your own, there are editors who are specifically providing that service of reading from the position of disability or diversity or something like that. The link is for the Spoonie Authors Network. They have an excellent resource there that you can find editors if you want to have someone with that specific skill set look at your work to give you an eye and give you feedback on where you're going. So that's my 2 cents on that. We are halfway through. Excellent. I was going to ask this, but H. Noss has asked over in the chat, what are your favorite examples of accessibility in science fiction? I was going to ask something like that. What authors or creators have you seen that have done it well? We've had one from Rebecca already. So what else can you tell us about examples you've seen of people doing it right?
So something that I found really interesting is a couple of instances in the show RWBY, RWBY. One character loses an arm and gets a very, very epic new prosthetic. But what really I found the more interesting was at one point there's a disabled character who is in a wheelchair, but it's not a wheelchair. It's sort of like a spider chair. It can climb and go places. And like, yes, it is in some ways limiting. You're not going to get this into a narrow space. It's a big chair, but it was just really cool to see it climbing around everywhere and the amount of functionality that this thing had.
I think 2 of my favorite sci-fi book examples that do various accessibility devices really well. The first one is Seanan McGuire writing as Mira Grant. Her Drowning in the Deep book has an autistic main character, and they also have it's a book about killer mermaids and a ship that's trying to basically televise how that's totally a hoax. Killer mermaids don't exist. Spoilers, killer mermaids come and start killing everyone. It's kind of horror. But one of the things that they do so incredibly well, she does so incredibly well with this book, is to show how this would actually work, and including people on the crew who are using sign language. And there's this huge, there's a bit of a controversy around that too, where it's like, wait, like, why is this person your first mate? And the captain's like, because he's badass at it, like, do not judge me. And you have like these like fake mermaids. They're actors who are like, oh yeah, we're like reality TV show mermaids, and one of them is using a wheelchair, or a couple of them are using a wheelchair. Some of them are using sign language, and the killer mermaids actually also communicate via sign language, because of course that's what would happen under the sea. Shauna Maguire in general as an author uses a lot of disability inclusion. So I would recommend her stuff, both fantasy and sci-fi. Another one that's really awesome, that's kind of historical, is Mary Robinette Kowal's Lady Astronaut series. The first book is The Calculating Stars. Her main character is a person with anxiety. Like, she has really, really severe anxiety, and it's probably honestly the best portrayal of anxiety and panic attacks that I've ever seen. But she also addresses a lot of historical disabilities, like characters with polio, characters who have to use an iron lung, who gets to like leave the planet, like if we all of a sudden have to leave because of an extinction event, and who doesn't. So a lot of these socio-political issues are getting addressed really, really well. I'll drop these into the chat too.
Excellent. Any other thoughts to add, anyone?
I love that, the setup for the killer mermaids. Oh, that would never happen. That's beautiful. I'm reading a collection of South Korean science fiction, ready-made bodhisattva. So it's all in translation. And I hit one that was called the Quiz Show by Kim Young-ha. And it's aboard a generation ship. And we don't know this initially. And slowly it's unpacked. And it's that the passengers have a virtual reality that's set out for them. And I was reading that and thought, oh, that's something that I'm interested in. Expanding beyond the physical. So, having these opportunities that don't exist. We have a confined space on the generation ship. And it just led to me, it's like, I was just thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, this could be applied to many different aspects of life, even beyond disability.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Can we move on to a new question? We have more.
More questions, please.
More questions. Jessica M. Dawn asks, what are some ideas for assistive devices in sci-fi for people who are visually impaired, hearing impaired, mobility impaired, or with chronic pain? So if you want, round robin brain teaser, take one off the list and hit me with an idea for Jessica, randomly, off the top of your head. I know you can do it.
So one thing I've used in my own work, this was in a short story where main character is blind, and she uses, like, there's braille and voice activated everything. So anything is either like tactile, where you like obviously have braille that's there, but it also will activate like an audible overlay. Obviously, like things like HUDs and whatnot that just would kind of projected into your assistive devices would be great.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
you go ahead.
Chronic pain can be helped by flotation pods, kind of a more sophisticated version of the goo pods that they have in the Matrix, but something in which people could just be supported on all sides. I know it would help me a lot.
Something fun, I think, that would build really well onto something that already exists in a lot of spacefaring universes is some kind of universal translator that's also just a hearing aid. Have those two things like built in together. And like things like that, where it's like, okay, it is kind of the thing that we already have, but it's enhanced by, this other technology that we don't have yet.
Exoskeletons. I want everywhere.
Someone's working on that, I'm pretty sure. I think it was a Dragon's Den episode.
That would also help me a lot. An exoskeleton. My braces do a limited job of it, but like we're not there yet.
It's interesting. I in my book that's coming out in a couple of weeks, I had written it, and then I was on a panel at CanCon, and there was a deaf person on the panel talking, and I was sitting there in the audience, and all of a sudden my mind drifted because it's like, oh, wait a minute. They have this tech. I have this tech. This tech could work. I could. Oh, wait a minute! And it was an already established piece of tech that had already been in 3 books that was perfectly suited to instantaneous translation of sign to spoken word. So 2 people who didn't speak each other's languages were provided with instantaneous translation. So it was just like, okay, wait a minute, rewriting that character, take that, fix that. So there are always ways that you can imagine what your world can be for people whose needs are not being addressed now. I have another question here from Missy, who says, how do you recommend authors handle non-consistent disabilities while keeping the world consistent? An example is I have a neurological disorder that causes my nerves to not process messages properly. Sometimes it does it well, sometimes traumatic manifests in chest spasms. How do you make things consistent when you're dealing with a disability that doesn't act consistently?
I'll go. I'm dealing with a protagonist that I sort of projected my own stuff on, and in that there's, say, sort of going through situations, and it varies. But the thread that goes through is this repetition that, say, you can count on it eventually. And in that, there's this great uncertainty. There's this great sort of tension building up. Is it going to be in this important, just around the corner? We're setting it up, we're developing it. Is this scene that's just around the corner, is the character going to be able to get through okay, unscathed, right? There's a sail through, or is it going to be terrible? And so, that I can see that constant question being repeated and repeated and repeated.
I think another interesting thing to explore with that too would be stimuli, right? Like, because if you have an inconsistent disability, like how a character is experiencing it would be by kind of like either analyzing or tracking these like stimuli, whether they, like if you have a character who maybe documents things in a journal and like they're like noting that, or they're having a conversation with someone who's like, hey, did you take your meds? Like, did you try out this? Like, what about this? I think, like, again, like including as many like diverse perspectives on that as possible would definitely help with inconsistencies, but also just plain addressing that. I think I always feel like it's super interesting to see how like certain characters, for example, with invisible disabilities, like doing really well in certain contexts, and then in contexts that might be really similar, they really don't. And then kind of examining like what changed here. What is it? Is it just the day? Is it like something else that's giving them input somehow that they may notice or not, that just changes the situation?
This is a fascinating question for me because well, for a few reasons, because I don't write fiction, and also because I voraciously read fiction, and then further also because Ehlers-Danlos has periods of intense flare-ups, and the entire condition is categorized by instability and constant change. So I don't know how one would do it directly in the book unless one had, or in the story itself, unless one had the character be extremely direct about their lack of consistent experience with the world itself. I make this effort to do on social media and also to do with friends, because like there are days when I'll be high energy and I'll be perfectly fine and everything is you know, fine and dandy, and there are days when I have dislocated a rib into a kidney and obviously can't function properly. So it's just, you have to, as a person with this type of disability, you have to face it head on. Otherwise you look flaky and you know, just like an awful friend who doesn't show up to things. So were I to write a character, which I won't because I'm very bad at fiction, that is what I would do.
Diana, any thoughts?
I mean, it's the most prevalent disability in my work is mental illness and is PTSD. So really my challenge is about like, how do I show their instability in a way that isn't consistent, but is also like consistent enough for the average reader to get it, because there's a way you can get away with it that will probably make sense to a large portion of mentally ill people. And while that is primarily who my work is for, I do want it to, you know, be accessible to, you know, non-mentally ill people and neurotypical people. Although, I mean, that's highly unlikely. I don't know a neurotypical person, so I probably bungled that one. But like you know, it's, for me, it's finding the right balance, and also like, because I specifically give a lot of my characters PTSD, finding the balance of like actually including flashbacks versus, you know, not like, you don't, unless you're doing something very specific, you want to be careful with how many flashbacks you use. Also, that is such a defining thing. And one of the ways that I have done that is, you know, by really emphasizing that there are different types of flashbacks. And, you know, sometimes you do have the whole flashback where you go back into that moment in time and you see the whole thing unfold in your head. But sometimes you just get kind of shaky and like more alert, or feel just like unsettled, or like you're being watched. And so that's how I try to like have it always be there in some form, even if the form is different throughout the book as the character goes through different parts of their journey.
Excellent. So we are running very close to the end of our time today. I would love it if you would each just give us a quick final thought that you'd like people to take away in terms of this addressing of disability accessibility in work, and where our audience might want to go from here in their own work.
So I'll go, I'll start, and I'll bring into this another book that I think does it in a very interesting way. I haven't decided whether it's well yet, but it's a very interesting perspective. It's called Stronger, Faster, and More Beautiful by Arwen Ellis Davis, I want to say. And it basically, explores how much we can push medical technology, how far we can push medical technology, how we can mix and match different parts of ourselves, of animals, of the machine world, etc. And it does it over 6 different storylines. It's really a beautifully written book. And I want people to take away that there's no limits in science fiction. We can explore things that we wouldn't necessarily do on living people. We can do this ethically. We can make thought experiments. We don't have to stick to reality.
I can't remember if we covered, I'm pretty sure we didn't cover erasure, getting, sort of say eliminating, especially say for a character who is magically healed, and that there's a it's not a great thing. there's this toss up of, oh yeah, let's just magically fix these people. But the like say receiving that, I know when I'm receiving it, I'm going, this doesn't feel real. I think the word is verisimilitude, just this resemblance of truth, and all of a sudden being pulled out, and it loses respect. So I know the temptation is there, but I urge to pull back from that and rethink that before you sort of, eliminate the, oh, you don't have to use the wheelchair anymore, right? So.
Yeah, I think one of my pieces of advice is definitely to always see accessibility and assistive devices as like additive devices, where it's like, oh, like this can add a facet to this. Like it's like often like that whole discussion, right? How inclusion and accessibility isn't like pie, like it doesn't take something away from you. But as authors, like the same kind of counts. Like just because you are widening your perspective, like that doesn't take away from anything else. And so it's just kind of like a good rule of thumb to constantly be like questioning these things, constantly talk to other people and taking in different perspectives. It'll overall just grow you so much as a writer. I'm a huge like proponent of like never stopping to develop things. And I mean, yes, as writers, sometimes we have that issue where we will like edit something to death, but there is a thing, right, where we're like, oh yeah, I wrote this book, I published this story, and now I already know more than I did before. So what am I going to do with that next? And to constantly keep pushing that forward, because I think that's kind of where all of these things are going.
Any thoughts, Diana?
Apparently not. Sorry, my brain just went.
We have all of Diana's thoughts, all of them.
And then it was gone. Like I had a thought midway through the last thing Alex said, and then I lost it by the time they finished their sentence.
Okay. All right.
But I think I got it back.
Okay.
What I will say is to really start paying attention to the disabled people in the stories that you are consuming. Where are they? Are they in the background? Are they major characters? What are their storylines? Are they treated with respect? Not just like by the other characters, but also by the way that that character's speaking and movement is written and acted and directed. Or how it is executed in whatever medium it is, because there will be variations on how these things are portrayed in media. There are certain things that I can do in a book where I can really get deep into my characters twisted head and like really explore those thoughts in a way that's much harder to do in a visual medium. But there are still ways to write those characters respectfully and honestly and vividly in every medium. Also, for the love of all that is holy, why is it that every single like large video game has this one quest line that's about a character who hears voices that's just very deeply uncomfortable? And can we please stop? Like even in Horizon Zero Dawn, I love that game like to the core of my being. But there's still one of those darn quests in like the like first area, and it's so prevalent to me. It's wild.
Yeah,
It was very
totally.
specific.
All right. So I think we are closing in on the end. So I would love it for all of you to take a moment and tell us where online our audience can find you and more about your work. No, really, I swear.
Do you swear though?
Oh, yeah, more than I should.
I'm on Twitter. There we go. Story underline or whatever magician. There we go.
I'm also on Twitter, but you can also find all of my books at this link I will helpfully put in the chat.
I am also on Twitter at Diana L. Gunn. That is both Diana and Gunn have 2 N's in them. And I have already posted links to all the panelists, including a link to my own Ko-fi shop. But really the thing that would mean the world to me is if you checked out the Weeknight Writers Ko-fi and considered becoming a sustaining member of these events so that we can keep running them and keep them hopefully free, or if we do end up having to charge for tickets down the line, we can keep them affordable for the people who need them most. This video is a recording of a panel from Storycrafting Sessions Science Fiction, a free virtual conference hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group in partnership with Renaissance Press. To learn more about the Weeknight Writers Group, go to businessforauthors.com/weeknight-writers, and to learn more about Renaissance Press, you can go to pressesrenaissancepress.ca.